Hello everyone, and tonight, let's step quietly into a medieval village. Long before electric lights, alarm clocks, or glowing screens existed, imagine lying down after sunset in a small wooden cottage, the fire slowly fading, the world outside completely dark. You fall asleep, but strangely, a few hours later, you wake up again. Not because something is wrong, but because this was perfectly normal. In fact, medieval people didn't sleep the way we do today. They had a mysterious nightly routine called the first sleep and second sleep. So relax, get comfortable, and let your mind drift as we explore the strange and forgotten way medieval people spent their nights. Sleep in the medieval world did not always follow the simple pattern most people know today. In modern life, many people believe that humans have always slept in one long stretch from night until morning. But historical evidence suggests that medieval people often experienced the night in a very different way. Instead of one continuous block of sleep, many individuals practiced what historians later described as segmented sleep. This meant that the night was divided into two main periods of rest, commonly referred to as the first sleep and the second sleep. Between these two periods, there was often a quiet stretch of wakefulness that could last for an hour or more, sometimes even two. During this time, the world was still, the village silent, and the only sounds might be the distant wind moving through wooden shutters or the occasional crackle of a fading fire in the hearth. When evening arrived in medieval Europe, daily life slowed down quickly because artificial lighting was extremely limited. Candles were expensive, and oil lamps were not always available to ordinary villagers. Most people depended on daylight for work and activity. So once darkness settled over fields and towns, families naturally began preparing for sleep. After eating a simple evening meal, people would often gather briefly around the hearth, sharing quiet conversation or finishing small household tasks. Soon after, they would climb into their beds, sometimes as early as shortly after sunset, especially during the long winter months when darkness arrived early. Beds themselves were quite different from the ones many people use today. Wealthier households might have wooden bed frames with rope supports and stuffed mattresses made from straw, feathers, or wool. Poorer families sometimes slept on simple straw pallets placed directly on the floor. It was also common for several family members to share the same bed in order to conserve warmth during cold nights. The first period of rest began soon after lying down and usually lasted several hours. This first sleep was often deep and heavy, especially after long days of physical labor in the fields, workshops, or kitchens. Medieval life required constant physical effort. Farmers ploughed land by hand, craftsmen used heavy tools, and women carried out exhausting domestic work like grinding grain, hauling water, and washing clothes in rivers or wells. Because of this, the body naturally entered a deep stage of sleep relatively quickly once night began. The first sleep might last 3 or 4 hours before people gradually awoke on their own without any alarm clock or disturbance. This awakening was not seen as unusual or troubling. Instead, it was simply part of the normal rhythm of the night. The quiet time between the first and second sleep was surprisingly active in a gentle and reflective way. Many medieval people used this period for prayer or contemplation. Religious devotion played a central role in daily life, and the stillness of the night offered a perfect moment for spiritual reflection. Some individuals would kneel beside their beds and recite prayers, while others might quietly think about the events of the day or ask for protection for their families. In monasteries and convents, this nighttime waking was even more structured. Monks and nuns often followed strict schedules that required them to wake during the night to perform specific prayers known as vigils or matins. These ceremonies involved chanting psalms, reading scripture, and maintaining a calm atmosphere of devotion before returning to rest. For ordinary villagers, the waking interval could also involve small practical tasks. Some people used the time to check on animals, adjust the fire, or prepare items needed for the next day's work. A farmer might step outside briefly to make sure livestock were secure, while a mother might check on a sleeping child. Because the village was so quiet at this hour, even simple movements felt peaceful and unhurried. Sometimes people simply sat quietly near the hearth or window, letting their minds wander in the darkness. Another activity sometimes mentioned in historical writings during this midnight interval was conversation between family members or married couples, because several people might share a bed or sleep in the same room. Waking in the middle of the night often led to quiet discussions. People might talk about plans for the coming day, worries about harvests, or stories from village life. Some historians also believe that intimacy between married couples frequently occurred during this waking period. Medical texts from the medieval period sometimes suggested that the body was more relaxed and receptive after the first sleep, making it a natural moment for closeness between partners. Eventually, after spending some time awake, people would begin to feel tired again. They would then return to bed for the second sleep, which lasted until the first signs of dawn. This second sleep was usually lighter than the first, and might include dreams that people remembered more clearly. Dreams were often taken very seriously in medieval culture. Many believed that dreams could contain messages from God, warnings about the future, or reflections of spiritual struggles. As a result, some people paid close attention to what they dreamed during the second sleep and discussed those dreams with others the next morning. The structure of medieval homes also influenced how people slept. Houses were often small, with limited rooms and minimal insulation. In rural cottages, a single large room might serve as kitchen, living space, and sleeping area all at once. The hearth in the center of the room provided heat and light, and beds or pallets were arranged nearby. Curtains or wooden partitions sometimes created small sleeping spaces, but privacy was far less common than it is today. Because of this shared environment, nighttime awakenings were normal and rarely disturbing. The quiet sounds of breathing, the shifting of straw bedding, or the crackle of firewood formed part of the familiar nighttime atmosphere. Seasonal changes also affected medieval sleep patterns. During winter, the long nights meant that people might remain in bed for extended periods, though not necessarily asleep the entire time. In summer, when daylight stretched late into the evening and returned early in the morning, sleep periods became shorter. Agricultural schedules followed the rhythm of sunlight, so farmers often woke at dawn to begin work in the fields. Even during these busy seasons, however, the pattern of first sleep, waking interval, and second sleep could still occur. Lighting technology played a major role in maintaining this natural rhythm. Before the widespread use of bright artificial lighting, human sleep was closely aligned with the natural cycle of darkness and light. When the sun disappeared, the environment grew dim very quickly. Candles produced only small pools of light and were used carefully to avoid waste. Without electric lights, screens, or late-night entertainment, the human body naturally responded to darkness by preparing for rest. Modern researchers studying sleep patterns have even observed that when people live without artificial light for extended periods, they sometimes return to a similar segmented sleep pattern, waking briefly during the night before falling asleep again. Historical records show that references to first sleep and second sleep were common in many written sources from the medieval and early modern periods. These references appear in personal letters, medical texts, literature, and even legal documents. Writers described activities occurring after the first sleep or before the second sleep, indicating that the pattern was widely understood. Over time, however, this pattern began to fade. By the 17th and 18th centuries, changes in society gradually reshaped nighttime habits. One major influence was the increasing availability of artificial lighting. As candles became cheaper and oil lamps more common, people could remain awake later into the evening. Urban areas also began developing street lighting, which allowed social activities to continue after dark. Coffee houses, taverns, and public gatherings became more popular, encouraging people to stay awake longer. With later bedtimes and earlier work schedules in growing cities, the natural pause between two sleep periods slowly disappeared. Eventually, the idea of a single continuous block of sleep became the standard expectation. Industrialization further reinforced this shift. As factories and urban workplaces expanded, strict schedules required workers to wake at specific times. Regular work hours encouraged a consolidated night of sleep, rather than a flexible rhythm tied to darkness. Over generations, this new pattern became so normal that many people forgot that earlier societies slept differently. Looking back at medieval sleep habits reveals how closely human life once followed the rhythms of nature. The quiet pause between the first and second sleep created a calm space in the middle of the night, a moment of reflection and stillness rarely experienced in modern life. In a world without electric lights, constant noise, or digital distractions, the night unfolded slowly and peacefully. The strange way medieval people slept may seem unusual today, but it reminds us that human habits are deeply shaped by the environment and technologies surrounding us. Even now, when someone wakes briefly during the night and wonders why sleep has been interrupted, it may simply echo an older rhythm that once guided countless nights across villages, castles, monasteries, and countryside cottages. The medieval night was not a single uninterrupted darkness, but a quiet journey divided into gentle stages, where sleep, wakefulness, reflection, and dreaming all had their place before the first light of dawn. As the night deepened across medieval towns and countryside, the stillness of the environment created a kind of calm that is difficult to imagine in the modern world. Without the constant glow of streetlights, electric bulbs, or screens, darkness truly covered the land. Once the moon moved behind clouds or the hearth fire burned low, many homes were surrounded by almost complete darkness. This darkness was not always frightening to medieval people. In fact, it was familiar and natural. They were accustomed to living closely with the rhythms of night and day, and their bodies adjusted to the slower pace of nighttime life. After waking from the first sleep, many people described the middle period of the night as unusually peaceful. The mind was often clear and relaxed, because the body had already experienced several hours of deep rest. unlike the groggy feeling many modern people experience when waking suddenly from sleep. Medieval individuals often woke gently and gradually. The quiet darkness of the room, the faint glow of dying embers in the hearth, and the soft breathing of others nearby created an atmosphere that felt calm rather than disruptive. Because medieval society was deeply religious, spiritual practices often filled this quiet time. Prayer was considered one of the most meaningful activities a person could perform during the silent hours of the night. Many believed that prayers offered in darkness carried special spiritual power. In monasteries, the night was carefully organized around cycles of prayer, known as the divine office. Monks would rise from their beds during the night to gather in stone chapels lit by candles. There they would chant psalms together in low voices that echoed gently through the halls of the monastery. After completing their prayers, they would quietly return to their cells to continue resting until morning. Outside monastery walls, ordinary people sometimes imitated these spiritual routines in simpler ways. A farmer might whisper a short prayer asking for protection over his crops or animals. A mother might pray for the safety of her children. The night felt like a sacred time when the world was quiet enough to reflect on life, worries, and hopes for the future. This middle waking period also allowed the body to relax in a way that modern schedules rarely permit. Without pressure to fall asleep immediately again, people often allowed their minds to wander naturally. Some individuals believed that this time was ideal for thinking about problems or making decisions. The mind, partially rested but still surrounded by silence, seemed to think more clearly. In a way, the night created a space for quiet mental reflection that modern life often replaces with noise and activity. Another interesting aspect of medieval sleep was the social nature of sleeping arrangements. Privacy during sleep was rare. In many homes, several family members shared a bed or slept in the same room. Even travelers often shared beds in inns with strangers, which might seem uncomfortable today, but was common practice at the time. Because sleeping spaces were shared, waking during the night sometimes turned into moments of quiet interaction. People might whisper to each other, share a story, or simply acknowledge one another before drifting back into sleep. Travelers' accounts from the medieval period sometimes mention how inns were filled with the sounds of people stirring during the night. Someone might wake to adjust blankets, another might stand up to stretch, and someone else might briefly step outside to check the weather or relieve themselves. These small nighttime activities created a gentle rhythm that people accepted as normal rather than disruptive. Dreams during the second sleep also held special meaning in medieval culture. Many people believed that dreams could reveal hidden truths or messages from spiritual forces. Religious teachings sometimes suggested that dreams might be influenced by divine guidance, angels, or moral struggles within the soul. Because the second sleep occurred after the mind had already rested deeply, dreams during this stage were often vivid and memorable. People might wake at dawn and describe their dreams to family members or neighbors, trying to interpret what they might mean. In some communities, certain individuals were believed to have special skill in interpreting dreams. These people might suggest that a dream about water symbolized emotional change, or that dreaming about certain animals predicted upcoming events. While modern science understands dreams differently, these interpretations played an important role in how medieval people understood their inner lives. Weather and seasonal conditions also shaped how people experienced sleep. During winter, Cold temperatures made staying in bed longer appealing. Heavy blankets, woolen clothing, and shared body heat helped people remain warm through the long night. The long hours of darkness meant that the period between first and second sleep might feel extended, giving people more time for quiet reflection or conversation. Summer nights were quite different. Warm temperatures sometimes made sleeping indoors uncomfortable, especially in small cottages where heat from the hearth lingered. Some people opened windows or even slept outdoors when conditions allowed. In southern regions of Europe, families sometimes rested in courtyards or near open doorways where cool night air could circulate. The sounds of insects, wind in the trees, and distant animals formed a natural soundtrack that accompanied sleep. Medieval medicine also offered advice about sleep habits. Physicians believed that proper sleep was essential for maintaining balance within the body. Medieval medical theory was based on the idea of bodily humours, which suggested that health depended on maintaining the right balance of fluids and energies. Doctors recommended going to bed after digestion of the evening meal had begun and waking with the sunrise. They also suggested that people avoid sleeping immediately after eating heavily and encouraged moderate activity before bed to help the body relax. Some medical texts even mentioned the usefulness of the waking period between the two sleeps. Physicians sometimes believed this time allowed the body to complete digestion and balance internal processes. Gentle activities such as prayer, reading religious texts, or quiet conversation were considered healthy ways to spend the middle part of the night. Not everyone experienced sleep peacefully. However, just as today, medieval people sometimes struggled with nightmares, anxiety, or restless sleep. The darkness of the night occasionally inspired fears of supernatural forces. Many cultures during the medieval period believed in spirits, demons, or creatures that might wander during the late hours of the night. Stories of mysterious figures, wandering souls, or night spirits were passed down through generations. These beliefs sometimes influenced how people understood strange dreams or unusual nighttime experiences. Despite these fears, most nights in medieval communities were calm and predictable. Villages grew quiet shortly after sunset. Only the occasional watchman guard or traveller moved through the darkness. The absence of constant activity meant that sleep followed the natural rhythm of the body more closely than it often does today. The gradual disappearance of segmented sleep did not happen suddenly. It occurred slowly over centuries as society changed. The introduction of brighter lighting, increased urban life, and more structured work schedules gradually compressed the night into a single block of sleep. By the 19th century, many references to first and second sleep had largely disappeared from everyday language. Today, researchers studying sleep patterns sometimes rediscover hints of this older rhythm. In experiments where participants live without artificial light for extended periods, some individuals naturally begin waking briefly during the night before returning to sleep. This suggests that the segmented pattern of sleep practiced by medieval people may reflect an older biological rhythm that modern lifestyles have gradually suppressed. The strange way medieval people slept therefore reveals something fascinating about human nature. Sleep is not only a biological process, but also a cultural habit shaped by technology, environment, and social expectations. in a world without electricity, television, smartphones, or late night work schedules. The night unfolded slowly. The darkness created space for rest, reflection, conversation, prayer. The medieval night was not simply a period of unconscious sleep stretching from dusk to dawn. Instead, it was a quiet journey divided into phases, each with its own purpose and atmosphere. First came deep rest after the exhaustion of daily labour, then a peaceful interval of wakefulness, when the mind could wander in silence. Finally came the second sleep, carrying people gently toward the first light of morning. When dawn arrived, and sunlight slowly spread across fields and rooftops, medieval households gradually came back to life. Roosters crowed, fires were rekindled, and the work of the day began again. Yet the memory of the quiet night remained, a reminder that rest once followed the slow rhythms of nature, rather than the fast pace of modern schedules. As midnight slowly passed, and the silence of the medieval countryside deepened, the world felt almost suspended in time. The darkness outside village homes was thick and complete, interrupted only by the pale glow of the moon or the faint shimmer of stars. Inside small cottages and stone houses, the warmth of the hearth had often faded to a dim orange glow, and shadows stretched across wooden beams and rough stone walls. During this quiet interval between the first and second sleep, many people experienced a calm sense of stillness that modern life rarely allows. The middle of the night was one of the few moments when medieval life slowed entirely. During the day, villages were filled with constant movement and sound. Farmers worked fields from sunrise to sunset. Craftsmen hammered metal in workshops, and traders travelled dusty roads between towns. Women spent long hours preparing food, weaving cloth, grinding grain, and caring for children. Every task required physical effort, and nearly every hour of daylight was filled with activity. The nighttime pause between the two sleeps offered a rare break from the physical demands of daily life. Some people spent this waking time simply lying in bed and observing the quiet world around them. They might listen to the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind through thatched roofs, or the occasional movement of animals outside. In rural areas, livestock sometimes stirred during the night. A horse shifting in a stable or a cow moving in a barn could be heard faintly through wooden walls. These sounds were familiar and comforting, reminding people that the world around them continued quietly, even while most of the village slept. Others used the time for gentle domestic tasks that required little light. A person might add a small piece of wood to the hearth to keep the fire alive until morning. Maintaining a steady fire was important because it provided warmth and made it easier to prepare food when the day began. If the fire went out completely during the night, it could take considerable effort to restart it the next morning. For this reason, some households carefully watched their hearth during the quiet hours between sleeps. In certain homes, people used this time for reading if they possessed books or manuscripts. Books were rare and valuable during much of the medieval period, especially before the invention of the printing press. Wealthy families or members of the clergy sometimes owned religious texts, prayer books, or handwritten manuscripts. By candlelight or oil lamp, a person might read a short passage or reflect on sacred writings. The calm silence of the night made reading feel more contemplative and meaningful. Storytelling also played an important role in medieval culture, and sometimes the middle of the night encouraged quiet storytelling among those who shared sleeping spaces. In cottages where multiple family members slept in one room, someone who woke might whisper a memory, a legend, or a piece of folklore. These stories were often passed down through generations and helped preserve cultural traditions. Tales of heroic knights, wandering saints, mysterious forests, or ancient battles sometimes filled the quiet darkness before people drifted back to sleep. Children who woke during the night might ask questions about the stories they had heard earlier in the evening. Parents sometimes use this moment to comfort them or explain lessons about morality, bravery, or kindness. Because nights were long and quiet, these small conversations often felt gentle and unhurried. The pace of life allowed time for reflection and storytelling in a way that modern schedules rarely permit. The middle waking period could also be a moment when people reflected on the natural world and the passing seasons. Medieval life was deeply connected to nature. Farmers closely observed the cycles of weather, moon phases, and changing daylight. During the night, someone might glance through a small window or step briefly outside to look at the sky. Observing the stars or moon sometimes helped people estimate the time of night. Without clocks in most homes, natural cues such as the position of the moon or the brightness of the sky provided a rough sense of time. In many regions, the night sky appeared far brighter and more detailed than what most people see today. Without artificial lights from cities, the stars formed a brilliant canopy stretching across the entire sky. Constellations appeared sharp and clear, and the Milky Way could often be seen as a faint glowing band. For medieval people, this vast sky inspired both curiosity and spiritual reflection. Many believed the stars were part of a divine order guiding the universe. Astrology also influenced how some people interpreted the night sky. Scholars and physicians often studied the positions of stars and planets, believing they affected human life and health. Although ordinary villagers might not practice astrology in a technical sense, they were still aware of common beliefs linking celestial events to earthly happenings. Seeing a bright planet or unusual star formation during the night might lead to quiet speculation about what it meant for the future. Another subtle aspect of medieval sleep involved the body's natural rhythm in darkness. Modern research suggests that when humans are exposed to long periods of darkness, the body produces hormones that encourage deeper and longer sleep cycles. In the medieval world, where nights were naturally dark for many hours, this biological rhythm may have encouraged the pattern of two sleeps, separated by a calm waking interval. Instead of forcing the body to remain asleep continuously, people allowed their natural cycle to unfold without pressure. The waking interval also helped reduce anxiety about sleep. In modern times, waking during the night often causes worry because many people believe they should remain asleep until morning. Medieval individuals did not share this concern. Waking during the night was expected and even described in everyday language. Because it was considered normal, people did not feel stressed when they found themselves awake in darkness. This relaxed attitude may have made it easier for them to fall back asleep again when the second sleep began. Gradually, the quiet activities of the waking period faded as drowsiness returned. The body, already partially rested, would begin to relax again. People might stretch slightly, adjust their blankets, or lie comfortably as sleep slowly returned. The second sleep was often lighter, but still refreshing. Dreams sometimes appeared more vividly during this stage, and the mind drifted through imaginative scenes before morning approached. As the eastern sky slowly brightened, the second sleep gently ended. In many villages, the first sound of morning came from roosters, crowing across fields and farmyards. Soon after, other animals began to stir. Dogs barked. Birds started singing, and faint light filtered through small windows or cracks in wooden shutters. These natural signals gradually awakened households. People rose from their beds and prepared for the new day. Fires were stirred back to life. Bread was warmed and simple breakfasts were prepared. Farmers stepped outside to check weather conditions before heading to the fields. Craftsmen prepared their tools, and women began the many household tasks that filled the day. The quiet mystery of the night gave way to the practical rhythm of work and community life. Looking back at these sleeping patterns reveals how differently people once experienced the night. Today, the darkness between bedtime and morning is often compressed into a single continuous period of sleep. Electric lights allow activity late into the evening, and alarms force waking at specific times regardless of natural rhythms. Medieval nights, by contrast, unfolded slowly and naturally. The strange way medieval people slept was not strange to them at all. It was simply the natural result of living in a world shaped by darkness, firelight, and the steady rhythm of the sun and moon. The night was not just a pause in activity, but a quiet landscape of reflection, prayer, conversation, and dreams. Between the first sleep and the second sleep, people experienced a rare moment of calm when the busy world stood still. In that stillness, surrounded by darkness and silence, the medieval night revealed its gentle rhythm, a rhythm that carried people from the exhaustion of day into peaceful rest, allowed them a brief moment of wakeful reflection, and then guided them once again into sleep until the first light of dawn returned to the world. As the hours of darkness stretched across the medieval landscape, the night often felt longer and deeper than modern nights. Without the constant glow of electric lights, the darkness had a thickness to it, almost like a quiet blanket covering the land. The world slowed down so completely that even the smallest sounds seemed noticeable. A wooden beam settling in a cottage, the faint crackle of cooling ashes in the hearth, or the distant bark of a dog could echo softly through the still air. During this calm period between the first and second sleep, people experienced a rare kind of silence that allowed the mind to wander freely. Many medieval people believed that nighttime carried a special atmosphere, one that felt separate from the ordinary activities of the day. Daylight belonged to work, labour, and responsibilities. But the night often felt like a time for thoughts, dreams, and mysteries. The middle waking period became a moment where people could exist quietly between the demands of yesterday and the tasks of tomorrow. For farmers who spent the entire day bent over fields, this peaceful pause in the night might be the only time they truly rested their minds. Inside medieval homes, sleeping spaces were usually simple but practical. As the night continued its slow passage over medieval villages and countryside, the atmosphere around sleeping households remained deeply calm and unhurried. Darkness did not feel like a short pause before the next day, but rather a long and quiet world of its own. The hours between dusk and dawn were expansive, giving people time to rest, wake, reflect, and sleep again in a natural rhythm shaped entirely by the absence of sunlight. Without clocks marking every passing minute, time during the night felt softer and less rigid, almost drifting forward at its own gentle pace. When someone woke from the first sleep, their senses slowly adjusted to the dim environment of the room. The faint glow of the hearth might still illuminate the outline of furniture, hanging tools, or wooden beams above. In poorer cottages, the interior was usually simple, consisting of a few benches, a small table, storage chests, and perhaps a loom or spinning wheel used during the day. Shadows cast by the fire created moving shapes across the walls as embers shifted quietly. These subtle movements were often the only signs of activity during the sleeping hours. For many people, this middle waking period brought a feeling of calm awareness. The body was rested, but not fully awake in the energetic sense of daytime. Instead, there was a peaceful clarity, a state where thoughts drifted slowly rather than racing. Medieval writers sometimes described this moment as a gentle time for thinking or remembering. A farmer might reflect on the condition of his crops, wondering whether rain would arrive soon. A craftsman might mentally review the work he planned to complete the next day. These quiet thoughts were rarely urgent. They flowed softly through the mind like distant echoes of the day's concerns. Because families often shared sleeping spaces, the room might contain several people resting at once. Parents, children, and sometimes even visiting relatives slept close together. The quiet breathing of others created a steady rhythm that filled the room. Occasionally, someone would turn in their sleep, causing straw bedding to rustle or wooden bed frames to creak slightly. These sounds were familiar and comforting, forming part of the natural atmosphere of the night. In wealthier homes where separate chambers existed, the night might still involve subtle movement. Servants sometimes rose quietly to ensure fires remained safe or to prepare items needed for the early morning. The responsibilities of maintaining a household never completely stopped, even during sleep. However, most tasks were carried out gently to avoid disturbing those who were still resting. The darkness outside the home often inspired imagination as well. Medieval people lived in a world filled with folklore and stories that explained the mysteries of the night. Tales of wandering spirits, protective saints, or strange creatures roaming forests were common in village traditions. Although many people did not truly believe these stories would affect them directly, the quiet darkness sometimes stirred thoughts about these legends. Children especially found the night mysterious. If a child woke during the middle of the night, they might whisper questions to their parents about sounds they heard or shapes they saw in the dim light. Parents often reassured them calmly, explaining that the noise might be the wind or an animal moving outside. These gentle conversations helped children relax and return to sleep without fear. During colder seasons, the warmth of shared blankets made the bed feel like a safe refuge from the chill air of the room. Medieval houses were not insulated in the way modern homes are, so indoor temperatures could drop significantly during winter nights. The glow of the hearth helped maintain warmth, but it rarely heated the entire space. Thick wool blankets and close sleeping arrangements helped people remain comfortable until morning. Sometimes people used the waking interval to adjust their sleeping environment. They might pull blankets closer, move a pillow, or reposition themselves to stay warm. Such small adjustments were natural parts of the night. Because sleep was divided into stages, these brief moments of wakefulness did not feel like interruptions. Instead, they were simply transitions between the deeper rest of the first sleep and the lighter dreaming of the second sleep. Outside, the natural world continued its quiet nighttime activity. The wind might move slowly through trees, creating a soft rustling sound across fields and forests. Streams and rivers flowed steadily in the darkness, their gentle movement barely visible, but faintly audible. Owls glided silently through the air while searching for prey, and distant animals occasionally called to one another across the countryside. For those who briefly stepped outside during the waking period, the night sky often appeared breathtaking. Without artificial light from cities, the stars filled the sky with remarkable clarity. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a faint glowing path, and constellations appeared sharp and bright. Medieval people often recognized many of these star patterns through traditions passed down over generations. Looking at the sky during the quiet hours of the night could inspire a sense of wonder about the vast universe beyond the small village below. In some regions, the moon played an important role in nighttime life. A full moon could illuminate fields and roads strongly enough that people could move around outside without lanterns. Farmers sometimes took advantage of bright moonlight to check animals or perform small tasks that were difficult in total darkness. Moonlit nights also carried a certain beauty that medieval poets and storytellers occasionally described in their writings. Eventually, as the waking interval continued, the body naturally began preparing for rest again. The calm environment, the steady breathing of others, and the dim light all encouraged the return of sleep. People would lie quietly, allowing their thoughts to fade gradually. There was no urgency to fall asleep quickly. Sleep returned on its own when the body was ready. The second sleep usually felt lighter than the first, but still provided valuable rest. Dreams during this stage could be vivid and memorable, sometimes blending elements of daily life with imagination and symbolism. A farmer might dream about walking through fields ready for harvest, while a merchant might dream of distant markets and journeys along busy trade routes. These dreams often faded quickly once morning arrived, but sometimes they remained in memory long enough to be discussed during breakfast. As dawn approached, subtle changes began to appear in the sky. The deep black of night slowly softened into dark blue. Gradually the horizon brightened with pale shades of grey or pink, depending on the weather. Birds often sensed the approaching sunrise before humans did, beginning their morning songs while the sky was still dim. These early sounds gently woke households. People stretched, yawned, and slowly rose from their beds. Fires were stirred back to life, sending small sparks and smoke upward through chimneys. The smell of bread warming near the hearth filled the room as families prepared simple meals before starting the day's work. The quiet journey of the night had ended, carrying people through stages of rest and reflection before returning them to the busy rhythm of daylight. Although medieval sleep patterns may seem unusual today, they reveal how closely human life once followed the natural environment. Darkness invited rest, silence encouraged thought, and the slow passage of the night allowed the mind and body to move between wakefulness and sleep without pressure. The medieval night was not merely a stretch of unconscious hours. It was a peaceful landscape where people paused between dreams and reality, where conversations were whispered in darkness, and where the human mind rested gently beneath a sky full of stars before the first light of morning signaled the beginning of another day. As the night continued to unfold across the medieval world, its stillness created a rhythm that people came to understand almost instinctively. Life during the day was full of movement, voices, animals, tools, and labor. But the night was something entirely different. Once the sun disappeared beyond the hills or forests, the world slowed to a quiet pace that allowed both the body and mind to settle. The darkness did not rush forward. It seemed to stretch slowly across the hours, giving space for rest, reflection, and gentle wakefulness between the two sleeps. For people living in small villages, nighttime had a communal feeling even though everyone remained inside their homes. Because houses were often built close together, faint sounds could travel from one household to another. Someone awake during the middle of the night might hear the distant creak of a door, the cough of a neighbor, or the quiet cry of a baby from another cottage. These sounds were rarely disturbing. Instead, they reminded people that they were part of a living community where many others were sharing the same peaceful darkness. In farming communities, the connection between human life and the land was especially strong. Even while people slept, the fields outside continued their silent work. Crops absorbed moisture from the cool night air. Soil slowly released the warmth it had stored during the day, and plants rested before the next sunrise. Farmers sometimes thought about these quiet processes when they woke during the night. They knew that the success of the next harvest depended on forces beyond their control. Rainfall, temperature, sunlight, and the slow growth of plants beneath the soil. Because medieval life depended heavily on agriculture, people were often very aware of seasonal changes. Nights in autumn felt different from those in spring. As the night moved deeper toward its quiet center, the medieval world often felt almost suspended between yesterday and tomorrow. Darkness settled over forests, rivers, farms, and villages like a great blanket muffling the noise and activity that filled the day. The air cooled, the wind softened, and even animals seemed to move more slowly. For people resting in their homes, this long stretch of darkness created a peaceful environment where time felt slower and less urgent than it does in modern life. Inside cottages and small houses, the warmth of the hearth continued to fade slowly through the night. Earlier in the evening, the fire had burned brightly, while meals were cooked and families gathered together. But by the middle of the night, only glowing embers remained. These small red lights cast faint shadows on nearby walls and furniture, making the room appear calm and quiet. When someone woke between the first and second sleep, their eyes gradually adjusted to this dim glow, revealing the shapes of familiar objects around the room. People living in the medieval period were accustomed to darkness in a way that modern societies rarely experience. Today, cities are filled with electric lights that keep streets bright throughout the night. But in medieval times, the darkness outside was nearly complete. Once a candle was extinguished or a lamp went out, very little light remained except for the moon and stars. This deep darkness encouraged people to sleep earlier in the evening and allowed their bodies to follow natural cycles of rest. The first sleep, which began soon after people went to bed, was usually the deepest stage of rest. After long days of physical labor, ploughing fields, carrying water, chopping wood, or working with tools, people's bodies naturally entered a state of deep recovery. Muscles relaxed, breathing slowed, and the mind drifted away from the concerns of the day. This deep sleep helped restore strength for the following day's work. Eventually, after several hours had passed, people would begin to wake naturally. This moment of awakening did not feel sudden or uncomfortable. Instead, it often felt gentle and gradual, as if the mind was slowly rising to the surface of consciousness. In the quiet room, a person might stretch slightly or shift their position before becoming fully aware of the stillness around them. This middle period of wakefulness could last anywhere from a few minutes to more than an hour. Because waking during the night was considered normal, people rarely worried about it. They simply accepted it as part of the natural rhythm of sleep. Some individuals remained lying quietly in bed, allowing their thoughts to wander. Others might sit up briefly, listening to the sounds of the night, or adding a small piece of wood to the fire. The atmosphere during this time often felt unusually peaceful, without daylight, work, or social responsibilities pressing on their minds. People could experience a moment of calm reflection. A person might think about family members, remember stories from childhood, or quietly consider plans for the coming day. These thoughts moved slowly and gently, carried by the stillness of the night. In some households, the waking period created opportunities for quiet interaction. If two people sharing a bed woke at the same time, they might whisper softly so as not to disturb others. Conversations during this hour were usually simple and relaxed. They might talk about the weather, discuss work that needed to be done, or share thoughts that had come to mind while resting. Married couples sometimes used this time for closeness and intimacy. Medieval writings occasionally suggested that this period between sleeps was an ideal moment for such activities because the body had already rested and the mind was calm. Afterward, people would settle back into bed and drift naturally toward the second sleep. For those who preferred solitude, the waking interval could become a time for quiet observation. Someone might notice how the air felt cooler during the deepest hours of the night, or how the sounds of insects and animals changed as the night progressed. In rural areas, the distant hoot of an owl or the soft movement of livestock could sometimes be heard through wooden walls. Weather conditions also influenced how the night was experienced. On calm nights, the air might be completely still, making the silence feel even deeper. On windy nights, the sound of gusts passing over rooftops or through trees created a steady background noise. Rain falling on thatched roofs produced a soft rhythmic sound that sometimes helped people fall asleep again. Occasionally the moon illuminated the landscape strongly enough that faint light entered homes through small windows or cracks in shutters. When this happened, the room might glow with pale silver light, revealing shapes and textures that were hidden in complete darkness. Some people enjoyed looking out at moonlit fields or forests during the waking interval, appreciating the quiet beauty of the night. The sky itself often inspired a sense of wonder. Without artificial lights from cities, the stars appeared extremely bright and numerous. Constellations stretched across the sky like patterns drawn in light, and the Milky Way formed a faint glowing band overhead. Medieval people sometimes believed that the heavens reflected divine order, and observing the stars could encourage feelings of humility and curiosity about the universe. Eventually, The peaceful waking period came to an end as the body naturally prepared for sleep again. Drowsiness returned slowly, and people settled back beneath their blankets. The second sleep then began, carrying them through the remaining hours of darkness. This phase of sleep was usually lighter, but still restorative, allowing the mind to wander through dreams. Dreams during the second sleep could feel vivid and memorable. Medieval people sometimes believed that dreams held special meaning or messages. A dream about traveling might be interpreted as a sign of future change, while dreaming about certain animals or natural events could be seen as symbolic. Although interpretations varied widely, dreams were often discussed during the morning, especially if they seemed unusual or striking. As the night approached its end, the environment slowly began to change. The sky lightened gradually in the east, signaling the arrival of dawn. Birds were often the first creatures to notice this shift, beginning their morning songs while the world was still dim. Their voices filled the air with gentle sound that spread through villages and countryside. Soon afterward, roosters crowed loudly, announcing the coming day. Farmers and villagers stirred from their beds, stretching and preparing to rise. Fires were rekindled, breakfast foods were prepared, and the quiet homes of the night transformed once again into busy places filled with movement and conversation. The strange pattern of medieval sleep, divided between a first sleep, a waking interval, and a second sleep, was not seen as strange at the time. It was simply the natural way people rested in a world shaped by darkness, physical labor, and the steady rhythm of nature. Without electric lights or rigid schedules, the night unfolded slowly and peacefully, allowing the body and mind to move between rest and wakefulness without stress. Today, many people experience sleep as a single uninterrupted block, often interrupted only by alarms or disturbances. Yet the medieval pattern reminds us that human sleep has not always followed the same structure. For centuries, people across villages, farms, monasteries, and castles shared nights that moved gently through phases of deep rest, quiet awareness, and dream-filled sleep. In that world, the night was not simply a time when life stopped. It was a calm and mysterious landscape where thoughts drifted quietly, conversations were whispered in darkness, and the mind wandered beneath a sky filled with stars. Between the fading glow of the hearth and the first light of morning, medieval people experienced sleep not as a single moment, but as a peaceful journey through the many quiet hours of the night. As the deepest part of the night settled across medieval landscapes, the world entered a kind of stillness that modern societies rarely experience. Without the constant hum of machines, traffic, or electric lights, silence became a natural part of nighttime life. Villages that were lively during the day became almost completely quiet after sunset. The roads were empty, fields rested under the open sky, and the only movement came from the wind, animals, or the occasional traveller moving carefully through the darkness. Inside homes, the slow rhythm of breathing from sleeping family members filled the room. Wooden structures creaked slightly as temperatures dropped and materials contracted in the cool air. The faint scent of smoke from the hearth lingered in the room, mixing with the smell of straw bedding and wool blankets. These simple details formed the sensory environment of the medieval night, one that people grew familiar with from childhood. When someone woke from their first sleep, the transition into wakefulness was rarely sudden. Instead, the mind surfaced slowly, becoming aware of the quiet surroundings before fully awakening. Because there were no bright lights or loud alarms to interrupt sleep, the body followed its own natural rhythm. People might lie still for a few moments, listening to the silence and feeling the warmth of their blankets before deciding whether to rise or remain resting. In many cases, individuals simply remained in bed during the waking interval. They allowed their thoughts to wander through memories or quiet reflections. Medieval life involved many responsibilities: farming, cooking, repairing tools, caring for animals, and the night provided a rare opportunity to think. As the night moved slowly toward its quietest hours, the medieval world seemed to exist in a delicate balance between rest and wakefulness. Darkness covered fields, forests, rivers, and stone villages, creating a peaceful atmosphere that felt almost timeless. Without artificial light or constant human activity, the night unfolded naturally, guided only by the movement of the moon, the glow of stars, and the slow passage of time. For those who woke between the first and second sleep, the world felt unusually calm. The air inside homes was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from the hearth. Outside, the wind sometimes whispered through trees or moved gently across open fields. In these moments, people became aware of how quiet the world truly was. Even the smallest sound, a wooden beam shifting slightly, or the soft rustle of bedding, could be clearly heard in the silence. The body during this time felt different from the alert energy of daytime. Muscles were relaxed, breathing slow, and the mind rested somewhere between dreaming and waking. Many people described this state as peaceful rather than restless. Because waking during the night was considered normal, there was no pressure to immediately fall back asleep. Instead, people simply allowed themselves to experience the quiet moment before the second sleep arrived. Medieval life was deeply tied to natural cycles, and the night was seen as an important part of those rhythms. Just as fields required periods of rest between seasons of planting and harvest, people believed the human body needed time to restore itself. The two phases of sleep allowed the body to recover gradually, with the waking interval acting almost like a pause between chapters of rest. During this pause, people sometimes became aware of the distant sounds of the landscape around them. In rural areas, farms were surrounded by fields and forests filled with wildlife. An owl might glide silently through the air before landing on a tree branch, while small animals moved through grass searching for food. Occasionally, a fox barked somewhere far away, its call echoing softly through the darkness. For people living close to rivers or streams, the sound of moving water could sometimes be heard faintly during the quietest hours of the night. The gentle flow of water over stones created a steady background sound that blended with the silence of the countryside. These natural sounds became part of the nighttime environment, forming a peaceful rhythm that accompanied sleep. In coastal regions, the night carried different sounds. Waves moving slowly against the shore could be heard from villages near the sea, and fishermen sometimes woke during the night to prepare their boats for early departures. The smell of salt air and the distant movement of tides created a unique nighttime atmosphere in these communities. Within homes, the waking interval often encouraged small acts of care and responsibility. Someone might quietly check that the door remained securely closed, or adjust a shutter to prevent cold air from entering the room. These actions were performed gently, so as not to disturb others who remained asleep, because many homes stored food, tools, and household items in the same room where people slept. Waking during the night also meant briefly observing the objects that shaped everyday life. Wooden chests containing clothing or grain, clay pots used for cooking, woven baskets filled with vegetables, and tools resting against walls were all visible in the dim glow of the hearth. These familiar items reminded people of the work and routines that would return with the morning. For individuals who lived in towns rather than rural villages, the night sometimes felt slightly different. Although towns were still quiet after sunset, there were occasionally faint sounds from distant streets. A watchman's footsteps might echo along stone roads as he walked his route, carrying a lantern to inspect the area. His presence helped protect the town from fires or disturbances during the night. In some larger towns, bakeries and certain workshops began their work very early in the morning. Sometimes even before dawn, bakers in particular needed to prepare bread hours before it was sold in the marketplace. As a result, someone awake during the late hours of the night might occasionally smell fresh bread baking or hear the distant movement of workers preparing for the coming day. Despite these occasional signs of activity, the medieval night remained largely peaceful. Most people were asleep, and the waking interval between sleeps was experienced quietly within homes rather than outdoors. This quietness gave the mind time to wander freely through memories and imagination. Dreams during the second sleep often reflected the experiences of daily life. Farmers might dream of fertile fields ready for harvest, while craftsmen might dream of tools and materials used in their work. Children sometimes dreamed of stories they had heard earlier in the evening, tales of knights, distant lands, or mysterious forests filled with adventure. These dreams were not always taken lightly. Some medieval people believed that dreams might contain hidden meanings or messages. Religious teachings sometimes suggested that dreams could reflect spiritual struggles or guidance from divine forces. Because of this belief, people occasionally discussed their dreams during the morning, especially if the dream seemed unusual or vivid. As the night continued, the sky slowly began to change. Long before the sun appeared, the darkness started to soften slightly. The stars near the horizon faded first, followed by a gradual lightening of the eastern sky. This slow transformation often occurred while people were still in their second sleep. Birds were usually the first to respond to the approaching dawn. Their songs began softly at first, then gradually grew louder as more birds joined the morning chorus. This natural alarm clock gently awakened many people before the sun even appeared above the horizon. Soon after, roosters crowed loudly across farms and villages, signaling that the day had arrived. The quiet stillness of the night slowly gave way to the sounds of morning activity. Doors opened, fires were rekindled, and animals were fed as families prepared to begin another day of work. Although the pattern of 2 sleeps might seem unusual today, it fit naturally within the medieval way of life. People worked hard during the daylight hours and rested deeply during the long nights. The waking interval between sleeps was not considered an inconvenience, but rather a normal and even useful part of the night. This pattern allowed time for reflection, prayer, conversation, and observation of the quiet world around them. Instead of rushing through the night, medieval people experienced it in stages. moving gently from deep rest to calm wakefulness and back into sleep again. In the end, the medieval night was not simply a gap between 2 days. It was a slow and peaceful journey through darkness, guided by natural rhythms that humans had followed for centuries. Between the fading warmth of the evening fire and the first light of dawn, people rested, dreamed, and quietly reflected, while the world outside waited patiently for the return of the sun. As the deepest hours of night continued, the medieval world felt almost untouched by movement. Darkness stretched across valleys, forests, and farmland, with a quiet presence that modern people rarely experience. Without electric lights or constant human activity, the night truly belonged to silence. Villages that had been filled with voices and labour during the day now rested peacefully beneath the stars. Inside cottages and homes, the faint glow of embers in the hearth often remained the only source of light. Earlier in the evening the fire had burned brightly, warming the room and lighting the space where families gathered to eat and talk. By the middle of the night, however, the flames had settled into a gentle bed of coals. These glowing embers cast a soft reddish light across nearby surfaces, revealing the outlines of wooden furniture and hanging tools. When someone woke during the interval between the first and second sleep, their eyes slowly adjusted to this dim light. At first the room appeared almost completely dark, but gradually shapes became visible. The edges of a table, the curve of a wooden chair, or the outline of a doorway began to emerge from the shadows. These familiar shapes reassured the mind that everything remained as it should be. The quietness of this moment often created a sense of calm awareness. Without the pressure of daily tasks or the distraction of noise, people sometimes became more aware of their surroundings. The warmth beneath blankets, the cool air near their face, and the gentle rise and fall of breathing all became noticeable sensations. This awareness made the middle waking period feel peaceful rather than disruptive. Many medieval people used this time simply to rest quietly and think. Their thoughts might wander slowly through memories of the past or plans for the coming days. A farmer might think about the condition of his crops and wonder whether rain would arrive soon. A blacksmith might imagine the tools he planned to forge the next morning. These thoughts move gently through the mind without urgency. Because medieval life depended heavily on the land, people often thought about nature during these quiet moments. The success of harvests depended on weather patterns, soil fertility, and the changing seasons during the waking interval. Individuals sometimes reflected on these natural forces and hoped that the coming weeks would bring favourable conditions. Families who shared sleeping spaces occasionally spoke quietly during this time. Conversations were usually soft whispers so that others would not be disturbed. As the night stretched toward its quietest and most mysterious hours, the medieval world seemed to pause in a deep stillness that modern people rarely encounter. Darkness settled over villages, farms, forests, and rivers, with a calm presence, as if the land itself had fallen into rest. Without artificial lighting, the night was truly dark, and the sky above appeared vast and full of stars. For those awake during the interval between their first and second sleep, the silence of the world could feel both peaceful and strangely powerful. Inside homes, the air had usually cooled by this point in the night. The warmth from the hearth had slowly faded, and the thick blankets or woolen covers people slept beneath provided most of the remaining comfort. People often shifted slightly under these covers during the waking interval, pulling them closer around their shoulders or adjusting their position on straw mattresses. The rustling of bedding was one of the few sounds heard in the room. Straw mattresses were common among ordinary families, and over time they developed small dips and uneven areas where the straw had compressed. Although these beds might seem uncomfortable by modern standards, medieval people were accustomed to them and often slept deeply despite their simplicity. Some wealthier households used feather-filled mattresses that provided softer support, but even these were far less uniform than modern bedding. The quiet moments between the two sleeps often gave people a sense that time had slowed down. During the day, life was filled with movement. Animals needed feeding, tools needed repairing, crops needed tending, and food needed preparing. At night, however, the responsibilities of the day temporarily faded. This created a rare opportunity for quiet thought and reflection. A person lying awake might recall events from earlier in the week, or think about conversations they had shared with neighbours. Village life was close, knit, and people often relied on one another for help during planting seasons, harvests, and times of hardship. During the stillness of the night, these relationships sometimes came to mind. Someone might think about a neighbour who needed assistance or about a gathering that would take place in the coming days. Because medieval communities were small, everyone in the village usually knew one another. News travelled slowly but was shared widely through conversation. When people woke during the night, their thoughts sometimes drifted toward these small pieces of community life. The upcoming market day, a wedding celebration, or a religious festival. Religion remained deeply woven into everyday life, and the quiet hours of darkness were often seen as a meaningful time for spiritual reflection. Many people believed that the calm of the night allowed them to feel closer to the divine. Without the distractions of daylight activity, prayer felt more focused and sincere. In monasteries, this belief shaped daily routines. Monks were expected to wake during the night to perform prayers known as vigils. These ceremonies took place in dimly lit chapels, where candles provided the only illumination. The chanting of prayers echoed softly through the stone halls, creating a peaceful and solemn atmosphere. After the prayers were finished, the monks returned quietly to their sleeping chambers and continued resting until morning. Outside monastery walls, ordinary people sometimes followed simpler versions of these practices. A person might whisper a short prayer while lying in bed or silently ask for protection for their family and animals. The night felt like a sacred time when worries could be placed into the hands of a higher power. Another aspect of the medieval night was the awareness of the natural world. Because there were few barriers between homes and the surrounding environment, people were closely connected to the sounds and movements outside. Wind moving across fields could be heard through the walls, and the occasional call of an animal carried through the still air. Dogs were particularly important during the night. Many families kept dogs as guardians to alert them if strangers or wild animals approached the house. If a dog barked suddenly during the night, it often caused people to wake briefly and listen carefully. After a few moments of silence, they usually returned to rest, once they realized there was no danger. The moon also played a significant role in shaping the atmosphere of the night. On nights when the moon was bright and full, the landscape outside appeared almost dreamlike. Fields and roads were faintly illuminated, and shadows from trees stretched across the ground. People sometimes looked out at the moonlit scenery during their waking interval, appreciating the quiet beauty of the world. In some regions, farmers believed that certain activities were influenced by the phases of the moon. Planting crops, harvesting plants, and even certain household tasks were sometimes scheduled according to lunar cycles. Although these beliefs varied widely, they reflected the strong connection medieval people felt with natural patterns. As the waking interval continued, the body gradually began preparing for rest again. The quiet environment and the absence of strong light made it easy for sleep to return. People would close their eyes and allow their thoughts to fade slowly, drifting back into dreams. The second sleep that followed often carried people through the final hours before dawn. This phase of sleep was usually lighter than the first, but still refreshing. Dreams during this time could feel vivid and memorable, sometimes blending everyday experiences. For example, a farmer might dream about walking through fields filled with ripened crops ready for harvest. A merchant might dream of traveling along distant trade routes or visiting busy marketplaces. Children might dream of stories they had heard from parents or elders, tales of brave knights, mysterious forests, or distant kingdoms. As the night slowly approached its end, subtle changes began to appear in the sky. The darkest part of the night gradually softened as the eastern horizon became slightly lighter. This change was often so gradual that people did not notice it until birds began to sing. Birdsong was one of the earliest signals that dawn was approaching. Small birds awakened first, their voices filling the quiet air with soft notes. Soon afterward, roosters crowed loudly across farms and villages, announcing the beginning of the new day. These natural sounds gently stirred people from their second sleep. One by one, families woke and began preparing for the day ahead. The embers in the hearth were stirred back into flame, casting warm light across the room once again. The peaceful stillness of the night slowly gave way to the energy of morning. Doors opened, animals were fed, and the smell of cooking food filled the air. Farmers prepared their tools, craftsmen organized their materials, and children stirred from their beds. Although the medieval pattern of 2 sleeps may seem unusual today, it reflected a natural relationship between humans and the environment. The absence of artificial lighting allowed the body to follow rhythms shaped by darkness and daylight. Rather than forcing sleep into a single block, people moved gently between deep rest, quiet wakefulness, and dream-filled sleep. In that world, the night was not simply a period of unconsciousness. It was a peaceful landscape where the mind wandered freely, where prayers were whispered in the darkness, and where the quiet beauty of the stars reminded people of the vast universe above them. Between sunset and sunrise, medieval people experienced the night as a journey through stillness and reflection. The first sleep carried away the exhaustion of the day. The waking interval offered a moment of calm awareness, and the second sleep prepared them for the return of sunlight and the work that awaited with the coming morning. As the final hours of the medieval night slowly approached, the world seemed to rest in a deep and steady calm. Darkness still covered the countryside, but there was often a subtle change in the atmosphere that only those awake during the late hours might notice. The air sometimes felt cooler and fresher, and the silence seemed even deeper than before, for people lying quietly between their first and second sleep. These moments created a feeling of peaceful isolation, as though the entire world had paused for a short while. Inside medieval homes, the environment remained simple but comforting. Wooden beams stretched across the ceiling, rough walls surrounded the room, and small windows allowed only the faintest hints of outside light. Furniture was usually minimal, perhaps a wooden bench, a chest for storing clothing or grain, and a table where meals were prepared. During the night, these objects appeared as dark shapes against the faint glow of dying embers in the hearth. The hearth was truly the heart of the household. Throughout the day it provided warmth and a place for cooking. But during the night it quietly continued its work by holding small glowing coals. These embers released just enough warmth to keep the room from becoming completely cold. When someone woke between sleeps, they might notice the gentle flicker of these coals, or the faint crackle of a log shifting slightly as it burned down. Some people used this moment to quietly place another small piece of wood onto the fire, ensuring that the embers would survive until morning. Fire was not something easily replaced in the medieval world. If the hearth fire completely died out, families sometimes needed to borrow a flame from a neighbor, or spend time carefully creating a new spark. Because of this, maintaining a small steady fire through the night was often considered important. As the medieval night continued its slow and quiet passage, the sense of stillness often became even deeper. The world outside remained calm and shadowed, with the land resting beneath a sky scattered with stars. Villages that had been filled with voices, animals and tools during the day now lay silent. Only the occasional sound of wind brushing through trees, or the distant movement of animals reminded anyone awake that the world was still alive in the darkness. Inside cottages and homes, the middle hours of the night carried a peaceful atmosphere. The air often cooled as the warmth of the day faded completely. Thick wool blankets and simple bedding helped people remain comfortable as they rested. When someone stirred during the waking interval between the first and second sleep, they might pull the blankets closer or shift slightly on their mattress to find a more comfortable position. The beds of medieval people were very different from modern ones. In many homes, the base of the bed was made from a wooden frame laced with ropes. These ropes supported a mattress filled with straw or sometimes feathers. Over time, the ropes could loosen and the mattress would sag slightly, so families occasionally tightened the ropes to keep the bed firm. Despite these simple designs, people were accustomed to their beds and slept deeply after long days of work. During the quiet interval of wakefulness, the mind often drifted into calm reflection. Because there were no bright lights or noisy distractions, thoughts moved slowly and gently. A person might remember events from earlier in the day, such as a conversation at the village well or a task completed in the fields. These thoughts were rarely urgent. Instead, they flowed softly through the mind, carried by the peaceful silence of the night. Many medieval people also used this moment to listen carefully to the sounds of their surroundings. The world at night revealed different kinds of noises than the daytime. Insects hummed softly in summer months, creating a steady background sound. The faint rustle of leaves might signal a small animal passing through a garden or field. Occasionally, the The distant call of an owl echoed across the countryside. For those living near forests, the night sometimes brought mysterious sounds from deeper within the trees. Branches creaked gently in the wind, and unseen creatures moved quietly through the undergrowth. Although such noises might have felt strange to modern ears, medieval people were accustomed to them. They understood that the night belonged to animals just as much as the day belonged to humans. In many households, animals were kept close to the home for safety. Chickens might rest in nearby coops, while goats or sheep were sometimes sheltered in small barns or attached spaces. If these animals stirred during the night, their movements could occasionally be heard by people inside the house. A goat shifting its weight, or a chicken fluttering briefly, might cause someone to wake momentarily before settling again. Dogs played an especially important role during nighttime hours. Many families kept dogs as guardians who could warn them if strangers or wild animals approached the house. If a dog barked suddenly in the middle of the night, it often caused people to wake briefly and listen carefully. Most of the time, the barking stopped quickly, and people returned to their quiet rest. The moon also shaped the atmosphere of the night. On nights when the moon was bright, the countryside appeared almost magical. Fields were faintly illuminated, and shadows stretched across the ground from trees and buildings. A person awake between sleeps might glance out a window and see the landscape bathed in soft silver light. This moonlight sometimes helped travellers who needed to move along roads at night. Although travelling after dark was not common, some merchants, messengers, or pilgrims occasionally continued their journeys by moonlight. The pale light of the moon made it possible to see the path ahead without carrying a lantern. The night sky itself was one of the most remarkable sights of the medieval world. Without artificial lighting from towns or cities, the stars shone brilliantly across the sky. Thousands of points of light formed patterns that people recognized as constellations. Some of these star patterns were connected to stories and legends passed down through generations. Looking at the sky during the quiet hours of the night could inspire feelings of wonder. Medieval people often believed the heavens reflected the order of the universe and the presence of divine forces. The stars seemed distant yet powerful, reminding people of the vastness of the world beyond their villages. While the night continued, the waking interval gradually ended as sleep returned naturally. The body, already refreshed from the first sleep, slowly relaxed once again. People closed their eyes and allowed themselves to drift gently into the second sleep. The second sleep carried them through the remaining hours before dawn. During this stage, dreams were often vivid and memorable. The mind combined fragments of daily experiences with imagination, creating scenes that sometimes felt strange or symbolic. A person might dream about traveling through distant lands, speaking with people they had not seen in years, or walking through fields filled with golden crops. Dreams were often discussed in the morning, especially if they seemed unusual. Some medieval people believed dreams could contain hidden messages or signs about the future. Others saw them simply as reflections of thoughts and emotions from the day. Regardless of interpretation, dreams remained an accepted and fascinating part of the night. As the second sleep continued, the sky slowly began to change. The darkest hours passed, and the eastern horizon gradually grew lighter. This transformation happened slowly enough that most people did not notice it until the first birds began to sing. Birdsong was often the earliest signal that dawn was approaching. Small birds started their songs softly, filling the quiet air with gentle notes. Soon afterward, roosters crowed loudly across farms and villages, announcing that morning had arrived. These natural sounds gradually awakened households. People stretched and rose from their beds, stirring the embers in the hearth until flames appeared again. The warm light of the fire replaced the dim glow that had filled the room during the night. The peaceful stillness of darkness slowly faded as the sounds of morning activity spread through the village. Doors opened, animals were fed, and the smell of cooking food drifted into the cool morning air. For medieval people, the night had been more than just a time of unconscious rest. It was a gentle journey through darkness that included deep sleep, quiet wakefulness, and dream, filled rest before the return of daylight. The pattern of two sleeps reflected a world guided by natural rhythms rather than artificial schedules, without bright lights or late night distractions. The human body followed the slow cycle of night and day. Between sunset and sunrise, medieval people experienced the night as a calm and meaningful part of life. The first sleep brought deep rest after the labor of the day. The waking interval allowed moments of quiet reflection, and the second sleep carried them gently toward the first light of morning and the beginning of another day. As the quiet medieval night continued to unfold, the sense of calm that surrounded homes and villages deepened even further. The world beyond the walls of cottages and houses remained wrapped in darkness, with only the moon and stars providing faint illumination. For people awake between their first and second sleep, the night could feel almost timeless, as though the hours stretched gently forward without hurry. Inside the home, the atmosphere remained peaceful and still. The glow of the hearth had faded to only a few scattered embers, and the room was filled mostly with shadows. People lying in bed could hear the faint sounds of the building itself, the soft creak of wooden beams adjusting to the cool air, or the gentle shift of straw inside a mattress when someone moved. These sounds were familiar parts of the nighttime environment and rarely disturbed anyone. Because many medieval homes were small, sleeping spaces were shared by several members of the family. Parents, children, and sometimes relatives all rested within the same room. The quiet breathing of others created a soft rhythm that filled the darkness. If someone woke during the middle of the night, they could sense the presence of those around them even without seeing them clearly. This shared sleeping arrangement helped people feel secure during the long hours of darkness. In a time when homes were surrounded by forests, fields, and open land, the closeness of family provided comfort and protection. Knowing that others were nearby made the quiet night feel less lonely. The waking interval between the first and second sleep often felt like a peaceful pause in the flow of time. People rarely rushed to return to sleep. Instead, they allowed themselves to experience the calm moment fully. Some simply lay still, listening to the silence and feeling their bodies relax after the deep rest of the first sleep. Others allowed their thoughts to wander gently. Medieval life was filled with daily responsibilities. But during the night, those tasks faded into the background. Someone might think about the work waiting in the fields the next day, or remember stories heard during the evening. These thoughts moved slowly and quietly, shaped by the calm atmosphere of the night. In some homes, a person might quietly sit up and look toward the hearth. If the embers appeared too weak, they might add a small piece of wood to keep the fire alive until morning. Fire was an important resource.